Welcome to Planet, People, Mining, Voices at the Crossroads of Mining, Communities, and Sustainability. I'm your host, Allison Koppel. I have over 20 years in this space in 5 mining companies. I then found myself in transition when this podcast emerged through reconnecting with my incredible network, whose insights may be heard as one-off episodes on other platforms, while here they take center stage. If you're also a trailblazer with stories from the field, a mining colleague curious about what these people even do, if you're interested in this field of impactful, motivating work, or from another industry, join us as we celebrate their contributions, demystify their roles, and explore the community and sustainability issues they tackle. And for our Spanish-speaking audience, busca Planet People Mining en Español. Episode 5, Transforming Boardrooms Through Community Immersion, with Geralda Wildschutt. In today's episode, I speak with Geralda Wildschutt, board member of 2 publicly traded mining companies and CEO of Maisha Social Solutions, a social performance consultancy firm. Holding a master's in educational and community psychology and an MBA, Geralda has blended field experience working in communities suffering from trauma with fundraising and strategic partnership strategies to managing social performance for Anglo-American based in South Africa, where she's from. We talk about what better board-level decisions look like, from ethics to country entry strategies, when they're informed by deep field experience working with communities. Okay, so here I am with today's guest, Geralda. How are you? Thank you for being on the podcast.
I'm doing very well, and I'm so delighted that you are doing the podcast and that I get to be on it.
Oh, of course, you were definitely at the top of my list of inviting Geralda. We've had a lot of good professional times together. But not everyone knows you as well as I have gotten to know you. So why don't you introduce yourself beyond what I shared in your bio? And what are a few major life and work milestones?
Oh, Alison, it's been so long since you and I, saw each other in person. I moved from working as a social performance manager within Anglo American at the time between 2009 and I left at the end December of 2015. I worked across Africa, Latin America, some work in Australia. And of course, I met you when we did this work in Chile and in Peru. And then I went on to start Maisha Social Solutions and working as a consultant and advisory capacity with mostly mining and the mining industry and a bit of renewable energy, doing similar work, which is all around, supporting social performance practitioners, working cross-functionally, as I believe we should, with all the different functions at the mine. And then I'm also on the board of 2 listed mining companies.
So when did you realize, that this work, this social work, this work with communities is your calling, your career path? I think it was before Anglo-American, no?
Yes. Look, I think you know that I come from the nonprofit sector and I'm an educational and community psychologist. So I've always done community work and I've always seen myself really at heart being a community worker. I always knew that I wanted to work with people and wanted to work with community. And so, yeah, entry as a community psychologist working in South Africa and very difficult, violent communities. That was my start. And understanding, communities of trauma, understanding communities within conflict environments. And I think, working within the mining industry and advising and helping companies understand community, I think there's a golden thread there that I think is just so what we still need to do. And so, yeah, I think I've always known that this is what I wanted to do. Once see concepts come and go, I think at the heart of it is understanding still what people want. And so I think people is the important component and I always knew I wanted to work with people.
What I love about this work that I've done over my career and the teammates that I've had or professionals who I've met who work with communities is that everyone comes into the work and the intersection of communities and mining companies in a different way. And so
Mm.
your way was deeply from the community side, and you were starting to explain some of your earlier experiences on the ground. And it sounds like some very challenging environments. What was your first community related job?
I went to go work within a community called Manenberg, and it's what's called the Cape Flats of South Africa. It's obviously in Cape Town, in the Western Cape province, and it was at the time, and I went there in 1998, doing an internship to register with the South African Health Professions Council as an educational psychologist at the time. But because I did my internship setting in community, that was what I wanted to do. And the kind of work I did was work within just local schools in an area. And this is a very violent, not just this community, but many of the communities, surrounding communities of South Africa, Cape Flats. I went on invitation to Northern Ireland to speak in Belfast at a conference on the conflict, learning around, how Northern Ireland were dealing with children and young people, youth growing up in the troubles, in settings of conflict. And we did this trauma work learning, between the two countries. In the last 3 years in the organization, I worked as the director responsible for fundraising. And this is, of course, doing all the work we now, talk around establishing strategic partnerships, how source from international donors, governments, etc.
Well, I just learned so much about you, Geralda. I wasn't familiar with your background in these communities that experienced different forms of trauma and violence before. And that helps me understand better why you've always been so attuned to the community point of view. I guess fortunately in my career I haven't had as much experience in communities that have suffered from violence. And actually one
Mm.
of my most memorable, I guess, experiences that I've had in the field was outside of Cape Town in South Africa. And I don't recall if you were on this trip with me. We went to
Yes.
this community outside of Cape Town. It was an area with very precarious structures. Maybe it's called in some countries a shanty town, and it was huge. I had never
Mm.
personally been in such an environment that, for as far as the eye could see, there were structures, out of tin and whatever the people could find. And we were touring with a nonprofit organization that worked with local residents to use their homes to plant trees, to plant seedlings, and that they would
Mm.
cultivate the seedling and be able to sell it to a nursery and be part of this small economy of this nursery. So we got to tour into this home, and I started the tour with the group of colleagues before really understanding what this community's life was on a day by day basis.
Mm.
And went into this small home, and the owner, she was so proud of, I think it was about 5 tree seedlings that she was cultivating, that she was going to sell to the nursery, and this was part of her livelihood. And so it was a very wonderful, I thought, program that allowed the local residents to have greenery in their life. And she spoke to us so warmly and welcomed us into her home. And it wasn't until we went back into our classroom experience that one of our colleagues familiar with this community explained that every day in that community, someone died. Someone died.
Mm.
And it was probably someone that this woman personally knew. And other honestly awful things happened that they described to us that happens on a daily basis within this community. Just you telling me about your background, which I'm just learning about right now, brought to light that image that I had in my head of that community visit and how special your work has been, Geralda. And it makes a lot of sense to the later work that I did get to do alongside with you. And like I said, that empathy and that understanding that you immediately brought in, I just thought you just closed a circle for me.
Thank you. Alison, I do think, that as you know, communities are close to my heart, but I think that we can't do this work within the mining industry if we don't understand communities from a sociological, psychological, anthropological, we've got to really understand communities. But the example I want to make is that, I in the peer learning program that I actually implemented and ran for Anglo, and you hosted the peer learning circle. And I went into communities just outside of Santiago. And I remember walking in the street. I don't know if you remember that, but we visited all these small businesses outside of Santiago. And one of the things that I think were very important for me when I would take, and I still do that now, for clients of mine, when you take cross-functional people working within the mining at a mine together with corporate, and they can be from the social performance through to, supply chain, HR, whatever function, and you take them into community settings. The things that I've learned is that I think there's so many things that are similar for communities, what communities need, what communities want, and how we take that into design work of when we do all of the work really to get that social license to operate or to manage whether so that there isn't conflict with communities. At some stage, I think, we learn that from that perspective of need, what communities value, respect for what communities think are their greatest assets.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, and exactly what you say, the importance of bringing the non social person into the community setting and help them to connect and see how does this mining project impact this person's life and helping them see through the eyes of that community person. And like you said, then bring it back to the company and have that be part of the design. You just aren't there telling your colleagues, hey, this is how it's going to impact the people around here, but they also experience it as well.
It's the experience, isn't it? So to that point too, Alison, when I think around, we spoke about these companies that I'm on the board of. I visit communities and community projects with board members. I see how this also clicks for my peers or my colleagues, So I think whether you're on the board, whether you are an executive in the company, whether you're making, if we make strategic decisions on whether you're going to go and mine within a context that you haven't before, and you're doing these risks assessments on understanding what is a, for example, conflict driven community or communities of extreme poverty, communities where government expectation is going to be high. This is all that work, I think, when, we say these words of you've got to take the ESG strategy into the boardroom and across the business. This is really the tangible, what this means in practice, isn't it?
Geralda, I want to stay on this thread for a minute because this is really important and different than what I often think of and see in terms of a board member for a mining company. But I think this is more and more the trend as companies realize that it's not just a nice to have a board member who isn't just cognizant of broad, non-financial, non-technical risks to the company in the environmental space and the social space, governance space, but who truly has this experience and can bring along the other board members along the journey of understanding this experience and understanding how, in this case, understanding the company's impact in the community is part of their decision making. And could you could just tell us a little bit more where you think your experience of bringing board members to understand better the impact of the company on the community and the opportunity of building relationships with the nearby
Mm.
has influenced decision making at that level.
I think this is as you know, we are moving into a future or a context where again mining is going to be fundamental for delivering the green economy, isn't it? We're going to have to do a lot and a lot more mining. And I think, therefore, at the boardroom level, I think we all are having to think about the context, the geographies that we need to go to on, the locations where we are going to go mine. And as the companies, I think make these decisions to say, should we get into what mineral? Now when you'd be thinking around, what mineral, what is my growth strategy, where am I going to go? Are you thinking then therefore also about what does that local context look like? What is that going to mean for the company in terms of financially from a sustainability perspective? When people are saying, but in this country, the government wants me to, contribute to all of these things that are socioeconomic issues. And really, the government should be doing this because, this is the mandate of government or of local government, and a company is paying taxes. So really, this shouldn't be our issue. And I think that is the type of questions now board members need to think about and say, as part of your entry strategy into a new country or continent or context, whether you can think like that, and does that mean you understand the context sufficiently? Because down the line, when you are going to have these expectations for local ownership, for local content, for local contribution, on infrastructure, whatever that looks like, that is financial, that has financial implications for the business and for that asset that you want to acquire. So I think this kind of thinking that we've always applied as, I want to call us social performance practitioners, from a risk lens, from an opportunity lens, from a social political context understanding. This is what we take with this understanding and mindset. This is what we take into the boardroom.
You didn't see my arms throw up in recognition of what you just said around the conversation that you would hear others in general say, well, that's just not my job. That's what the government is. I paid my taxes, so they're supposed to. And your response of, well, you clearly don't understand the context of this country if you are coming with that very, black and white expectation of how things are supposed to work, and that you've already decided that you understand it and that this is how you're going to act, well, then your business just isn't going to work if you're going to take that position. And to have a board member who is able to not just question, is that the right approach? Is that the right expectation? Will this assumption enable us to be able to understand this environment, socio-political environment, and be able to understand if we can have a viable business there? But you have that deep connection and experience to not just raise the question, but also inform your board colleagues about there are other approaches and other frameworks we can apply here to help us better understand the context in which we would like to do business. And that to me sums it up so much because I've been in those exact conversations where there's this expectation how things are just supposed to be without understanding that there's a whole professional discipline and practice behind understanding those assumptions and verifying those assumptions, and that you bring in that expertise that is so critical at the board level, and that most boards, I would venture to say, do not have that expertise in the room.
Hoping that is changing, Alison, because I think, again, as to my point, I started saying, we're going to have to mine so much more within the next 10, 20 years. And if we don't understand what this is going to mean for people, it's about all of this community relations, how you work with people who will give you that permission or not for that company to come in there, and mine. If you look at countries like the Congo, where we're going to, lots have been written and said around cobalt and copper and the difficulty. I do some work for clients, and I have for, a long time, since 2009, been doing some work. And the last couple of in my consultancy for the last 5 years, I've been frequently in and out of the Congo and looking at, the impacts there on children, mothers, young people working with artisanal and small scale mining. These are solutions, I think, that are very hard to solve, because even in that one, I see people saying it is the cost is and risk is too high for a company to go and work within a country like Congo. And so therefore the company should not go there. But on the other hand, if there are no, if we deprive that country for people to benefit from the minerals, that doesn't solve the answer either. And so I'm also, all about how do we then work within the context of supporting artisanal and small scale miners. I think boards need to just get the people or the representatives within board members who come with this understanding and knowledge. I think they just have to have it at all boards, and where it's not, I think that those companies would need to step up.
So, what would make your job easier? Your job being in general, bringing along fellow board members, bringing along through your consultancy practice, senior leaders of a company to understand how critical this community perspective is to their decision making.
I think if there are existing champions for the work, whether that is obviously on the board, it would be easier. At that executive level and at the board level, you need through all of those levels champions for ESG or sustainability. So people who understand this. And again, when one say, oh, ESG has got to be integrated within the strategy of the business. Again, this is what it means. It means you need to have the people who understand it, people who are able to operationalize it at every different element in the business. If you don't have those people, then talking about, integrating into strategy, it just stays a slogan. It won't happen.
Exactly. To have allies and champions who also understand this perspective within the business. What are a couple emerging issues that the industry should be more focused on?
I think issues of ethics is always high, and I think ethics is fundamental. I think the trends and issues around how ethics get implemented, within the business at their different layers of at the mine level, at the corporate level, at the board level, that understanding of what does that actually mean. Community practitioners were talking to me around the fact that if they go in to meet with the traditional leaders before they, get access to the public participation processes, and the chief is saying, but you didn't bring a gift. And the social practitioner is saying to me, well, what does this now mean from the company's anti-bribery act or, our internal systems around ethics? So again, I think ethics is an important aspect. And I think a company's gotta be certain that from a value base, that your codes, your practice on anti-corruption, all of this goes again throughout your business. Related to ethics for me is ethical responsible sourcing. So again, this comes, how you apply ethics within your supply chain. I think that maybe a third one to say that I think is important for consideration now and into the future is energy transition and the role that the mining industry has within energy and particularly renewable energy. And I often say, a mining companies are actually, or the mining industry is actually spearheading taking renewable energy into African continent because most of the big renewable energy projects, are started by mining companies. At the same level, when I'm thinking around, our conversations always on thinking around communities, is the issue of, if we talk not just renewable energy, but energy transition, is thinking around what is just. And within context of communities who've never had access to energy, what does this mean? And you come into Africa and you sign, to companies, what are your goals for your targets that you set for emissions and fossils and all of this whole conversation within a context of a continent where people are saying, we're not transitioning, to renewables. We've never had access.
Brilliant, Geralda. And two responses to what you just said. Starting with the last one, I appreciate how you framed that what you've seen in your work in Africa is that it's the mining companies who are often developing the first renewable energy projects at scale. And then what you said, it's not always a transition in the sense that people were accessing energy from a coal or fossil fuel based source and now it's a renewable source. It's access to energy, and that mining companies building these new energy projects, which happen to be renewable, communities seeing this as an opportunity of accessing energy for the first time. So I thought that was a really
Exactly.
interesting. And then the second one around your first point around ethics, and a company that I worked for really grappled with this exact scenario that you described of in the community where they were working in a different African country. Um, and the chiefs of that community, it was part of the local custom and a well-known custom to present gifts. And the mine, and similar to our previous discussion around board members wanting to just assume things worked in a certain way, and therefore the decision was going to be this in the absence of further information to understand the assumption. Decisions were made, well, we are not doing this. We are not participating in this gift culture. And what this company ended up doing was really leaning in and saying, well, how would we feel comfortable participating in this gift culture? What are our ethics and values, and how do we feel comfortable adhering to them? And in this case, realize that we feel comfortable when there is a procedure, when it is transparent, when funds are clearly disclosed, when there are multiple people making decisions transparently within an organization, when people are held to account for decisions around gift giving in an organization. And we started to realize that we can fully uphold our values and our commitment to transparency and ethics, and also participate in this local custom. And so it's back to what you were saying before around your board work. It's through the understanding and true understanding of a different culture and a different community that you can find alignment and a way of working that works truly for everybody. And that's why you need different expertise in the room. And so I thought your example was brilliant. And one final question that I always ask all of my guests is, advice do you have for others in your field to succeed?
Think find sponsors Always learn, believe in lifelong learning, and find sponsors, find allies, get into networks where you can learn. So it's a combination of formal learning and informal learning. Find mentors.
Thank you for that, Geralda. Thank you for this conversation. I've known you for more than 10, almost 15 years, and I've learned a lot in this last time with you with this podcast.
Thank you so much. You too. And good luck with this wonderful podcast.
Thank you for joining us. If you like what you heard, please like, provide a 5-star review, and amplify.